In this episode, we take the next step after dummy variables and learn how to create interaction terms in Excel. We'll continue using the same dataset as before: GDP growth rate as our dependent variable, and 4 explanatory variables: inflation rate, exports of goods and services growth rate, unemployment rate, and EU membership, which we already converted into a dummy variable in episode 4. Now we'll explore how these variables might work together, not just individually. Up to now, we've assumed each explanatory variable has its own separate effect on GDP growth. But in real economies, relationships often depend on context. For example, the effect of inflation on growth might be different for EU countries compared to non-EU countries. Interaction terms allow us to capture these kinds of conditional effects. An interaction term is simply the product of two variables. If we want to test whether inflation affects GDP growth differently inside the EU, we multiply the EU dummy by the inflation rate. This creates a new variable that equals the inflation rate for EU countries and 0 for non-EU countries. Let's see how it works in practice. To create the interaction term between the EU dummy and inflation, insert a new column. Name it something like interact2inf and type EU dummy times inflation. Copy the formula down the entire column. This new variable tells the regression. Check whether the slope of inflation changes depending on EU membership. It's a simple formula, but it unlocks a much richer interpretation. Now go to Data, Data Analysis, and run the regression with GDP growth as the dependent variable, and include inflation, exports growth, unemployment, the EU dummy, and the interaction term between the EU dummy and inflation as explanatory variables. Make sure Labels is checked and select a new worksheet for the regression table. This model allows the effect of inflation to differ between EU and non-EU countries. Here's how to read the results. The inflation coefficient now represents the effect of inflation for non-EU countries, our baseline group. The EU dummy coefficient shows the difference in GDP growth between EU and non-EU countries when inflation is 0. The interaction coefficient tells you how much the effect of inflation changes for EU countries. So if the interaction coefficient is negative, inflation hurts growth more in the EU. If it's positive, inflation hurts growth less in the EU. In our example, the interaction terms is negative, which means inflation hurts GDP growth more in EU countries. Interaction terms help us move beyond simple averages and understand how economic relationships vary across groups. This is a key step toward more realistic econometric modeling. In the next episode, we'll look at model diagnostics, where we check whether our regression assumptions hold and whether our model is reliable. Thank you for watching. Please like if you found the video helpful.